Hi there, my name is Tucker Hawkinson, and welcome to the first part of a two-part series on our EGR305 project. The overall goal of this project was to create an engine using a predefined set of drawings for all the engine parts. And as you can see from the image in the front, we ended up choosing the double oscillating engine. This engine had many components, and we decided to break it up as it was broken up in the drawing. That meant that we had four main subassemblies that were broken into other subassemblies. The first main one was number 1, and that is the base of it. The second is the flywheel and crankshaft and the pulley. The third is the cylinder in the bottom left. And the fourth is the piston assembly. So now we're going to break it up into subassemblies. The first subassembly that we'll talk about is the flywheel and crankshaft subassembly. This subassembly, as shown right now on the screen, consists of a flywheel and a crankshaft and a pulley. So we're not going to go into how every single part was made, but there are a couple that I do want to point out since they were more complex geometry than others. The flywheel is one of them, and a simple solution to this one was to start it by one shaft command getting the grand majority of the geometry, and then from there we were able to cut out certain areas and make some circular patterns, as you can see, to create what seemingly complex geometry. The crankshaft was not a complicated part, but had a lot of pieces to it. As you can see, it's made up of a few different pieces. There's two rods that end up connecting to the pulley and the flywheel. There's one rod in the center that connects the piston assembly, and then there's two blocks that allow an eccentric rotation around. The brass pins that you see are press fits in there to allow the whole assembly to go together. Again, none of these parts were very complex. It just created an extra subassembly. The pulley was an extremely simple part. It just had a single shaft command with a hole through it. The geometry on the shaft command was a little bit complex, but nothing too complicated. The next subassembly was the cylinder subassembly. This subassembly had quite a few pieces. There was the main cylinder piece, the upper cylinder piece, the cylinder base, the cylinder pin, and a piston rod gland, as well as 8 panhead screws. The main cylinder piece was probably the most complicated piece on the entire assembly, on the entire engine even. It started out with a shaft command. From there, because of some of the geometry, we had to create a plane that was offset a certain distance, and from there we'd pad the plane back out, and then we'd rotate it around a little bit and pad from the other side to create the sort of slightly harder geometry that you see in the side view. The most complicated part about this, though, was the slots that you see on the section view AA on the right hand side. Those slots, we tried to create those using two holes perpendicular to each other, but the geometry wasn't correct. So what we ended up having to do was pretty much a swept cut. The next two pieces are the cylinder top and cylinder bottom. These were not complicated pieces. They just took one shaft command around the center, and then some bolt holes. And the most complicated part of this was the 30-degree angle that you see to allow some relief for the gases running through the engine. That had to be done by using a mirrored extent and cutting that away. And the next two parts are very simple parts. The cylinder shaft, which connects to the front of the cylinder to allow it to rotate, and the hex on the top, which allows a good seal between the piston assembly and the cylinder assembly. The next subassembly is the piston subassembly. This consisted of the top piece, number 4, which is a set of 2 pieces that create sort of a pillow block around the top. Those are attached with M4 screws, and those connect. They're threaded to the main shaft, the main piston shaft, and at the base there is the piston end with a seal around it. None of these parts were overly complicated. They were all very simple shaft commands. The pillow blocks were the hardest pieces. That was a pad with an offset plane and a shaft command. The final set of assemblies will be handled in the other part of this video.